The courtroom was silent as the judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on the attorneys in front of them. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like time had slowed.
Hey there.
Everyone knew this was no ordinary hearing. The stakes were high, the personalities larger than life, and the legal maneuvers had already pushed the boundaries of patience for months. Filings had piled up, motions had been exchanged, and the case had grown more tangled with each passing week. But now the judge was ready to speak. And when they did, the words cut through the silence like a blade. In one swift statement, the judge called out the actions of one legal team, accusing them of abusing the court. Docket, wasting valuable time and undermining the process. It was the kind of rebuke that could change the direction of an entire case, and for Blake Lively, it was more than just a procedural win. It was a powerful public moment. One that shifted momentum and sent shockwaves through both the legal world and Hollywood. As reporters rushed to capture every detail, it became clear this was not just another celebrity lawsuit. This was a battle where every word and every move mattered. Blake Lively walked into the latest court session with a quiet confidence that seemed to surprise even those closest to the case. The tension in the courtroom was undeniable, and everyone knew this hearing was not just another procedural moment. It was a potential turning point in the already intense legal battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. The judge had reviewed countless motions, filings, and responses over the past several months. But what was about to unfold would leave the media buzzing for days as proceedings began. The judge immediately made it clear that certain behaviors in this case had gone too far in a tone that was firm yet controlled. The judge addressed what was described as repeated abuses of the court docket. And while the statement was directed broadly, the clear focus was on the tactics allegedly used by Baldoni's legal team. For weeks, there had been murmurs in legal circles about unnecessary filings, delays, and questionable procedural maneuvers designed to complicate the process. The judge appeared unimpressed by these maneuvers and spoke with a level of authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. This was not just about winning a motion or losing a hearing. This was about respect for the judicial process. And from the way the judge spoke, it was obvious that the court was drawing a firm line. Blake Lively's lawyers sat calmly as the judge criticized the patterns that had emerged over recent months, noting that the court docket had been filled with redundant motions and filings that lacked substantive value. These actions, the judge explained, were wasting the court's time and resources and were not in the interest of justice. The language was sharp but measured, and it sent a strong message that such tactics would no longer be tolerated. The media in the back of the courtroom scrambled to take notes, knowing that this moment would be a headline. The story of a judge openly calling out a high-profile legal team for abusing court procedures was not something that happened every day, and given the celebrity names involved, it was sure to dominate news cycles. Blake Lively herself remained composed throughout, occasionally glancing at her attorneys with subtle nods of acknowledgement. Her demeanor suggested both relief and validation. This was a significant moment in her favor, and she seemed to know it. Outside the courthouse, supporters of both sides had gathered, holding signs and debating in hushed tones as the news of the judge's remarks began to filter out through text messages and social media posts. The reaction was swift. Many praised the judge for standing up to what they saw as unnecessary legal games, while others viewed it as a rare instance of a court openly siding with one celebrity over another. Regardless of perspective, the impact was undeniable. This ruling and the accompanying rebuke shifted the tone of the entire case for months. The narrative had been that both sides were locked in an unpredictable back and forth, but now Blake Lively had notched another win, and it was one that came directly from the bench with no ambiguity. The legal implications were just as important as the public relations impact. By granting her motion and simultaneously calling out the opposing counsel, the judge had strengthened her position in a way that went beyond the immediate issue. It set a precedent for how future motions might be handled and made clear that the court was watching closely for any signs of procedural abuse. The scene outside the courthouse quickly turned into a media frenzy. Reporters jostled for position, hoping to get a comment from either party. But as often happens in high-profile cases, both sides kept their statements minimal. Still, the expressions on their faces told a story. Blake Lively walked out with a calm smile, while members of Baldoni's team looked noticeably tense. Some even avoided eye contact with the cameras. Legal experts watching from afar began offering their takes on the development, noting that judges rarely use such direct language unless they feel there has been a genuine misuse of the court system. This was not a minor procedural ruling. It was a public reprimand delivered in open court for all to hear, and in a case already saturated with public interest. That kind of moment can resonate far beyond the courtroom walls online. Discussions exploded within hours. Hashtags related to the case began trending with users, dissecting every detail from the tone of the judge's voice to the subtle reactions of the attorneys in the room. Clips from legal analysts flooded social media feeds, breaking down why this was a major boost for Blake Lively and why Baldoni's team would now have to tread much more carefully in the weeks ahead. This win was particularly significant because it came at a time when the case was entering a critical phase. Upcoming deadlines and hearings would likely shape the final outcome. And by securing a favorable ruling, now Blake Lively and her team had gained momentum that could carry them forward more confidently. The human element of the case was also on full display, as supporters celebrated outside. Some described feeling vindicated that the judge had recognized what they saw as stalling tactics. Others expressed hope that the case might now proceed more efficiently without the constant barrage of filings and counter-filings that had slowed progress for so long. In the grand scheme, this moment might be remembered as the point where the balance of the case began to tilt more heavily in Blake Lively's favor. And while the ultimate outcome was still uncertain, the events of the day would remain a key chapter in the larger story of this legal battle. As the day ended and the courthouse emptied, the sense lingered that something important had shifted, not just for the parties involved, but for the way this case would be perceived by the public and the press in the coming weeks, with the judge's words still echoing in their minds. Both legal teams left knowing that the rules of engagement had been recalibrated, and that the scrutiny on every move would now be even more intense. Blake Lively's calm, measured exit was perhaps the clearest sign of all that she understood. The weight of what had just happened, and was prepared to leverage this win to her advantage moving forward. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Blake Lively scores another courtroom victory. Judge rebukes opposing lawyers for docket abuse. It was the kind of coverage her team had hoped for, and it dominated not only entertainment news but also mainstream outlets that rarely gave more than passing attention to celebrity disputes. This was now a story about legal ethics and courtroom discipline, and that made it far more compelling to a broader audience. Blake Lively's legal representatives moved swiftly to frame the narrative in their favor while maintaining a professional tone. They released a short written statement emphasizing their respect for the court and their appreciation for the judge's dedication to efficiency and fairness. The statement did not attack the other side directly, but the subtext was clear. They believed the judge's remarks validated their position. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's team found themselves in a far less comfortable position. Privately, they were said to be frustrated by the characterization of their actions as abusive of the court docket. Some insiders claimed that the filings in question were legitimate and necessary, but publicly the team adopted a more restrained stance, issuing a brief comment stating that they respected the court's authority and would continue to focus on the substantive matters in the case. The legal community buzzed with commentary. Lawyers on television panels debated whether the judge's remarks were warranted, with some noting that in high-stakes cases, it is common to see a flurry of filings and procedural moves. But others argued that when the pattern becomes excessive and appears to be aimed at delay rather than resolution, it crosses a line. The phrase abuse of the court docket became a focal point in these discussions, and legal scholars began citing this case as a contemporary example of judicial pushback against procedural gamesmanship, while the legal analysis played out in professional circles. The public reaction was fueled by emotion. Many fans of Blake Lively saw the ruling as proof that she was being treated unfairly before, and that now the truth was finally being recognized. Supporters posted lengthy messages of encouragement online, with some sharing personal stories of their own experiences with drawn-out legal battles that drained their energy and resources. The sympathy for her was palpable. The court documents from the hearing quickly became sought after by journalists and bloggers eager to parse every word of the judge's remarks. Media outlets dissected the language, noting how carefully the judge had framed the criticism. It was sharp, but not inflammatory, measured, but unmistakable in its meaning. The choice of words suggested a deep concern for preserving the integrity of the court process and avoiding needless delays. Even some of Baldoni's critics acknowledged that such a public rebuke could have a chilling effect on how aggressively his team pursued certain procedural tactics moving forward. The ruling also had an immediate impact on the timeline of the case. Several pending motions were consolidated and others were dismissed outright, clearing the path for the next phase of proceedings. This streamlining was exactly what Blake Lively's team had been pushing for, and it meant they could now focus more directly on the core issues at stake, rather than being bogged down in procedural wrangling outside of court. The celebrity element continued to drive interest in the story. Paparazzi photos of Blake Lively leaving the courthouse with a composed smile were splashed across magazines and gossip sites with captions highlighting her latest legal win. Fashion blogs even weighed in on her outfit choice, interpreting it as a deliberate statement of confidence and control. Every detail of her appearance and demeanor was analyzed for clues about her mindset and strategy. On the other side, Justin Baldoni was spotted avoiding the press and keeping a low profile. His public appearances were limited, and when he was seen in public, he offered no comments about the case. This contrast in visibility only fueled speculation about how each side was handling the pressure industry. Insiders noted that the public perception of confidence can have a subtle but powerful influence on how observers interpret legal battles. Even if those perceptions do not directly affect the legal outcome, they can shape the broader narrative in ways that matter, especially when careers and reputations are on the line. Legal analysts also pointed out that judges do not typically single out a legal team in such explicit terms unless they feel that a boundary has been crossed. The fact that this happened in open court, rather than in a written order alone, underscored the seriousness of the matter. It was a signal not just to the attorneys in this case, but to the wider legal community that certain tactics would not be tolerated, at least not in this courtroom. As the days passed, the ripple effects of the ruling became more apparent. There was a noticeable shift in tone in the filings submitted by both sides. Language became more restrained, and the focus seemed to move back towards substantive arguments rather than procedural sparring. This change was welcomed by many observers who hoped it would lead to a more straightforward and timely resolution to the case for Blake Lively. The win provided a boost not only legally, but also in terms of public relations. Her supporters felt energized, her team appeared confident, and the media coverage painted her in a favorable light. She had managed to turn what could have been a dry procedural matter into a narrative of accountability and fairness that resonated far beyond the courtroom walls. Yet for all the apparent momentum, the reality remained that the case was far from over. There were still significant legal hurdles ahead, and the stakes were high. But in the world of high-profile litigation, even small victories can have outsized effects, and this was no small victory. The judge's words would remain on the record and would be cited in future hearings, shaping the way both sides approached the remainder of the battle. In many ways, this moment crystallized the contrast between the two legal strategies. One side now appearing focused and aligned with the court's priorities, the other forced to recalibrate under the weight of judicial scrutiny. It was a turning point, and everyone involved knew it. The coming months would test whether this shift could be sustained and whether Blake Lively could convert this momentum into a decisive outcome when the final judgment eventually arrived. But for now, she had reason to feel that the tide was finally moving in her favor. In the days following the judge's strong remarks, the atmosphere surrounding the case took on a new intensity. Media outlets that had previously covered the story sporadically were now dedicating full segments to it. Legal podcasts invited former judges and high-profile attorneys to analyze the implications of what had just happened. The consensus among many experts was that Blake Lively's team had been given a rare advantage, not just in substance but in perception. They argued that when a judge publicly calls out one side for abusing the court docket, it sends a signal that the court will no longer tolerate procedural maneuvering designed to delay or distract from the main issues. This shift was visible almost immediately in the way both legal teams handled themselves at the next scheduled hearing. Gone were the long-winded procedural arguments that had characterized previous appearances. Instead, the focus was on substantive matters and factual disputes. The judge appeared more satisfied with the streamlined approach and even noted during the proceedings that the pace of the case seemed to be improving. Blake Lively was present once again, and her calm, collected demeanor became another talking point for commentators. She listened attentively, taking occasional notes and whispering briefly to her attorneys during key moments. Her posture and expression conveyed confidence without arrogance, something her supporters and public relations advisors no doubt appreciated. Outside the courtroom, the mood was different than it had been just weeks earlier, where before there had been tension, uncertainty, and whispers of potential setbacks. Now there was a sense of forward motion her supporters spoke to reporters about, feeling vindicated and hopeful that the case would finally reach its conclusion without unnecessary delays. Justin Baldoni, meanwhile, maintained a lower profile. Though he attended the hearing, he avoided the cameras and left quickly afterward. His team issued a short written statement reiterating their commitment to presenting their case on the merits and avoiding further distractions. But analysts noted that the shift in tone was unmistakable. Gone was the aggressive procedural posturing. Replaced by a more cautious and restrained approach, legal experts debated how much of this change was genuine strategy and how much was the result of the judges. Sharp warning: some believed Baldoni's team recognized that continuing their previous tactics could further damage their standing with the court. Others thought it was simply a tactical pause until they could find another way to challenge Blake Lively's momentum. Whatever the motivation, the difference in approach was clear. The public reaction to these developments continued to be a key part of the story. Social media platforms were flooded with commentary from fans, legal watchers, and even other celebrities who weighed in on the drama. Many praised the judge for taking control of the situation and keeping the case on track. Others speculated about what this meant for future high-profile trials, suggesting that this could set an example for how judges might handle similar situations where one side is perceived as abusing. The press coverage also became more nuanced, with some outlets exploring the underlying legal issues in more detail, rather than focusing solely on the celebrity angle. This added depth to the story and allowed Blake Lively's team to highlight their arguments in a more substantive way, further bolstering their position behind the scenes. Her legal advisors were reportedly preparing for the next major phase of the case, which would involve presenting key evidence and witness testimony. They knew that the recent win gave them a strategic edge, but they were also aware that such advantages can be fleeting in complex litigation. The key would be to maintain discipline and keep the focus on the merits of the case rather than being drawn into side battles that could shift momentum back to the other side. Observers noted that Blake Lively herself seemed deeply engaged in the process. She was not simply leaving decisions to her lawyers, but was actively involved in strategy discussions and evidence reviews. Those close to her described her as determined and detail-oriented qualities that were now serving her well as she navigated the legal and public relations aspects of the fight. One particularly striking development was the way this ruling began influencing public opinion polls conducted by entertainment news outlets. A growing percentage of respondents expressed the view that Blake Lively was likely to prevail in the case, with many citing the judge's remarks as a turning point. These perceptions, while not directly relevant to the legal outcome, could still have an indirect effect by shaping the overall narrative and putting additional pressure on Baldoni's team in Hollywood circles. The case had become a frequent topic of conversation at industry events. Executives and creatives speculated about the potential fallout for both parties depending on the outcome. Some suggested that a win for Blake Lively could strengthen her negotiating position for future projects, while others wondered whether Baldoni might face reputational challenges if the perception of procedural abuse stuck with him long-term. The entertainment press also began drawing comparisons between this case and past high-profile disputes where judicial intervention played a decisive role. These historical parallels only added to the sense that something significant was unfolding, and that the outcome would be studied and discussed long after. The final ruling: in the midst of all this, Blake Lively maintained her public composure, appearing at select events unrelated to the case and interacting warmly with fans. She avoided discussing the matter in detail, but her willingness to be seen and maintain her professional commitments sent a subtle message that she was not defined solely by the legal battle she was fighting. By contrast, Baldoni's public appearances remained minimal and carefully managed, a strategy that some public relations professionals defended as wise, given the current climate, while others argued that it created a vacuum that allowed Blake Lively's narrative to dominate the space. The next scheduled hearing promised to be another pivotal moment, with the potential to either solidify her advantage or give Baldoni's team an opening to regain ground. But for now, the momentum clearly rested on her side, and every indication suggested she and her team intended to make the most of it. As the date for the next major hearing approached, anticipation grew both inside the legal community and among the public. The previous ruling had changed the tone of the case dramatically, and now all eyes were on whether that momentum for Blake Lively would carry forward. The media had framed the upcoming session as a crucial test for both sides. Analysts speculated that if Blake Lively could secure another favorable outcome, it would not only strengthen her legal position but also create a perception of inevitability that could influence settlement discussions behind closed doors. Her legal team was preparing, meticulously combing through every document, every piece of evidence, and every prior filing to ensure their arguments would be airtight. They were determined to show the court that they were aligned with its stated priorities of efficiency and focus on the substantive issues at hand. The strategy was clear. Avoid any appearance of unnecessary delay. Present concise and compelling arguments and continue to reinforce the narrative that they were working in good faith to resolve the matter. Justin Baldoni's team was equally busy, though their situation was more complicated. They were still dealing with the lingering effects of the judge's previous criticism and needed to demonstrate that they were now operating within the boundaries set by the court. Some insiders suggested they might adopt a more conciliatory tone, hoping to rebuild credibility with the judge, and perhaps shift some of the narrative away from the perception of procedural abuse. In the days leading up to the hearing, the press coverage intensified with outlets revisiting the details of the judge's earlier remarks and speculating about what might happen next. Television networks aired timelines of the case, highlighting the key moments and framing the story as a dramatic legal showdown between two determined sides. Even the more reserved legal trade publications acknowledged that the case had taken on a life of its own beyond the actual merits of the claims. Public interest was fueled by the celebrity factor but sustained by the legal twists and the human dynamics at play. Blake Lively continued to maintain her calm public demeanor, attending a few unrelated events where she was photographed, smiling and interacting with colleagues. She avoided discussing the case directly, but made sure to project an image of professionalism and poise. Her supporters saw this as further proof of her resilience and focus. On the other side, Baldoni remained largely out of the spotlight. His rare public appearances were brief and carefully managed, designed to avoid creating new headlines that might overshadow the upcoming hearing. The hearing itself began in a tense but orderly fashion. The courtroom was filled with reporters, attorneys, and observers eager to see whether the judge would continue the firm stance taken in the last session. Both sides presented their arguments. With noticeable restraint, the judge who had made headlines weeks earlier for the sharp rebuke appeared attentive and engaged, but also seemed to appreciate the more measured tone from both parties. Blake Lively's attorneys opened with a clear and concise presentation, emphasizing the need to move forward on the substantive claims. They outlined the evidence they intended to rely on and explained how it supported their position without straying into unnecessary commentary or personal attacks. The judge responded positively, asking clarifying questions and noting the efficiency of the presentation. Baldoni's team followed with their own arguments, focusing on specific legal points they believed were in their favor. They avoided the sprawling, procedural challenges of the past, instead zeroing in on a few carefully chosen issues that they felt could shift the momentum back in their direction. The contrast between this and their earlier approach was not lost on observers. Some analysts remarked that the judge's earlier comments had effectively reset the tone of the case, forcing both sides to adapt as the hearing progressed. It became clear that the judge was committed to maintaining control over the process. Interruptions were minimal and time limits were enforced with precision. When either side veered off topic, the judge quickly redirected them back to the matter at hand. This disciplined approach kept the session focused and prevented the kind of drawn-out exchanges that had bogged down previous hearings. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judge took the matter under advisement and announced that a written ruling would be issued within the next 2 weeks. While no immediate decision was handed down, the tone of the session suggested that the court was satisfied with the more disciplined approach from both sides. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Blake Lively as she exited. Her attorneys politely declined to answer detailed questions but expressed satisfaction that the hearing had gone smoothly. Her calm smile and composed demeanor once again became a focal point for the press coverage that evening. Major news outlets replayed clips of her leaving the courthouse alongside expert commentary about the case's trajectory. While the outcome of the hearing remained uncertain, the general consensus was that she had managed to maintain the momentum she gained from the earlier ruling. Social media platforms were abuzz with speculation. Some users predicted that she would win the next decision as well, pointing to the judge's apparent approval of her team's presentation. Others cautioned that it was still too early to declare a winner, and that the legal process could always take unexpected Turns regardless, the level of engagement was high, and the story showed no signs of losing public interest behind the scenes. Both legal teams began preparing for the next phase, knowing that the upcoming ruling could significantly shape the remainder of the case for Blake. Lively, a second consecutive favorable outcome could pave the way for a stronger negotiating position or even a decisive victory for Baldoni's side. A win could begin to shift the narrative and restore some of the ground they had lost in either scenario. The stakes were immense and both sides knew it. The days ahead would be filled with preparation strategy sessions and careful media management as the next pivotal moment in this high-profile battle drew closer. The dust settled on this latest chapter of the legal battle. One truth stood out. The momentum had shifted in a way that could not be ignored. Blake Lively walked away from the courtroom with her head high, her team buoyed by the judge's remarks and the clear message that the case would now move forward without the endless procedural hurdles that had bogged it down for so long. Outside cameras flashed and voices called out, but she remained calm, knowing that public perception and legal positioning were now working in her favor. The rebuke to the opposing counsel was more than just a momentary embarrassment. It was a strategic blow that could shape every decision going forward for Justin Baldoni's side. The challenge would be rebuilding trust with the court and finding a path that could counter the growing narrative against them. For Blake Lively, the focus would be maintaining discipline, presenting her strongest evidence, and keeping the story framed around fairness and accountability. Whatever twists still lay ahead, this turning point would remain etched in the timeline of the case. A reminder that in high-stakes battles, one decisive moment can alter everything.